Hello, UCLA Radio. This is Dr. No, and this is my interview with Ramsey Clark. You are the son of U.S. Attorney General and Supreme Court Justice Tom C. Clark and grandson of Texas lawyer and Judge William Ramsey on your mother's side. Were your father and grandfather's background in the legal system important factors in your decision to pursue law?
Well, my grandfather died before I was born, so any influence his life had on me was through others, primarily mother and grandmother, maybe some uncles. Of course, I grew up with my father. He was a private practitioner in Texas when I was born, and then went to the government when I was about 9, and became Attorney General when I was in law school. So, of course, his career had a big influence on me. I lived with lawyers and law talk at home, and when I go to the office, things like that, from at least early teens.
Yeah, and so, at the age of 18, you enlisted in the Marines just as World War II was coming to an end, and were eventually posted at Nuremberg as the defeated Nazi war leaders were tried there. What was it like being at such a significant event from the perspectives of both history and justice?
Well, it was, a dramatic demonstration of the consequences of war. I'd seen a great part of the damage of particularly West Europe from the war, but the city of Nuremberg itself was more than half destroyed. And you walk through ruins often at night coming back from court, which were a grim reminder of the consequences of war, and watching the prisoners during the daytime during the trial, and seeing the damage that they had wrought, that we had wrought as a consequence of our conflict. And the lesson seemed to be prevent war.
That's a call. And also, you mentioned in you've mentioned that as you were at the trial, the Nazi leaders, they said what about Dresden? What about Hiroshima? And turned basically they turned the tables on Allies kind of for their war crimes. And did that have an influence on your outlook, your perspective of the conflict, and any future ones?
Well, I was 12 or 13, I can't quite remember right now, 41 when the war broke out. And I think it was 12, tried to enlist. Of course, they were busy. They didn't have much patience. A bunch of dumb kids. There were several of us coming down there trying to enlist. But I went back when I was 17 and did enlist. Probably hadn't changed my values and sense of war between 1941 and 1945. But later I developed me quite a believer that we'd end war, or war would end us. Still am.
I see. And after the war ended, you worked your way up to the Justice Department under John F. Kennedy and Lyndon B. Johnson. During your tenure there, you worked extensively with the civil rights movement in some of its most volatile years. Can you tell us about your experiences with the movement?
Well, when I was from the South, or at least the Southwest, but East Texas is basically Southern. I mean, we were part of Confederacy, and segregation was very severe in my childhood in Texas. So the civil rights movement was something of enormous moral importance to me. While my original specific assignment in the Department of Justice wasn't in the area of civil rights, because I was a Southerner and talked like one, looked like one, and civil rights became a priority, I was pretty much shifted over. We were slow getting on top of it. The Kennedys themselves had no real background that gave them, personally felt experience about racism. They tended to approach the issue from the standpoint of how the poor Irish were treated up in Massachusetts when they were young, which was not at all good, but it wasn't nearly as bad as the way African Americans were treated in the South. So anyway, they started using me because I was young, and at a place like Ole Miss, I could walk across the campus and look like either a student or a graduate student, or I could sit in the cafeteria and not get beaten on by very angry students at the federal presence there, on Ole Miss campus. And I could go in and talk to judges who often had the prejudices of the community with a Southern accent that made it easier, at least initially, to approach them, try to reason together on how we're going to get these first grade kids in the class without anybody getting hurt. So I spent quite a bit of time in 62, particularly in 3 and 4. And even as deputy, I was sent down on Selma Montgomery March and things like that.
I see. And while you were Attorney General, you also bumped heads with FBI head J. Edgar Hoover, who pushed your predecessor, Robert F. Kennedy, and unsuccessfully tried to convince you to permit him to wiretap Martin Luther King's phone and communications. Did you have any apprehension at all about standing up to him and denying his request?
No, I turned down an enormous number of his requests. In the international field, spying on missions, embassies, and things like that, I pretty much, there were a few times when I interceded because I thought it was getting beyond foreign policy and national security. But I went along with the international security stuff as distasteful as it was, because it really wasn't my field of authority, and it wasn't of the same immediate consequences that domestic wiretaps could have, where you could have immediate police action. But on the wiretaps and the what we call the bugs, the secret or deceptive interception of conversations and private conversations. I was pretty severe. It turned down a lot more than I granted. They put a very high standard on the circumstances under which listening to other people's presumptively private conversations would be allowed. There had to be pretty good showing that there was some clear and direct risk to the public safety for me to grant one.
I see. And also during this time, the Vietnam War escalated gradually and became one of the most heated issues in the 1960s. As a member of the administration that most dramatically escalated the war, did you slowly come around to opposing the war, or as many Americans did, or did you just oppose it from the start?
Well, I opposed it from the start in the sense that I had decided by the time of the Korean War, which began 8 years before we came into office in '53, that these wars were not good for children, good for the future of the world. That we ought to avoid them where at all possible. And I thought that both the Korean War and the Vietnam War were wrongful. That it was something the United States should not be involved in. And that was my position internally in the government. Officially, I had no direct responsibility for foreign policy.
Mm-hmm.
I was rarely used in war decision-making policy. The only time it'd be used is when the president would want a negative voice in a meeting. And I'd be asked to come to some meeting because he knew he knew what I'd be opposed to foreign military adventurism. And he wasn't always opposed to it, but when he wanted some help on the opposition side, he'd call me in.
And after you left government service in 1969, you wrote a book called Crime in America, which covers many areas you were tasked with overseeing or combating as Deputy and Attorney General. What prompted you to write this book?
Crime in America?
Yes.
Well, it was really on domestic crime.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, in a sense, it was my idea of payback for having had the opportunity to work for 8 years, and then some years in high policy decision making, the last 4 years on law enforcement policy, criminal law enforcement policy. So I thought that the lessons of that experience, as I understood them, should be shared with the public because they don't get to see the inside view except rarely, and even then usually through some kind of filter, either press that just has part of the story or propaganda from the administration. And so I thought the thing to do was write a book on it. In addition, I didn't think I should practice law for a year because I was offended by people coming out of the government and capitalizing on the experience in private practice. So my wife and I decided we'd do a little traveling, and we'd write a book and enjoy ourselves for a year before we got back to making a living.
Yeah, and some of the subjects you cover in Crime in America include drugs, organized crime, privacy, and the death penalty. Do you feel your insights on these topics remain relevant? Has there been any progress in these areas from your point of view?
There's been progress in some areas. I think there's been considerable progress in the selection and qualification of recruiting for police. In 61, I don't think there was a chief of police in the United States who had gone to college, much less it was just one of the lowest rungs on the employment ladder. And I thought police work is one of the most important things to both the safety of the public and the preservation of freedom for the public. So I thought an upgrading of police from the standpoint of their sensitivity to public needs and causes of crime and methods of preventing crime. Preventing crime is worth a lot more than chasing people after they've committed a crime. And I thought reform was a very great need, reforming police. They ought to be paid more, they ought to be trained better, they ought to be selected for an interest in the quality of life of the American people, economically and socially and morally. That they make a big difference. They can make you hate your country or love it.
Yeah, and around the...
I thought the book would be helpful.
Yeah, well, it was... sorry.
probably pretty naive, but I still believe in books and love them.
Well, it was a very insightful read and very informative, so I recommend it to any listeners. Anybody listening. So. Around the same time you wrote A Crime in America, the Nixon administration escalated the bombing of North Vietnam and began bombing Cambodia. It was rumored that thousands of civilians were being killed, a charge the administration vehemently denied. You took it upon yourself to travel to North Vietnam, and given the travel restrictions in place, you had to fly to Russia and from there to North Vietnam to see the results of the campaign. Can you tell our listeners what you saw there?
Well, I saw North Korea that was hiding in the day and working at night. Cities that had no children or minors, really, up to say age 14. Mm-hmm. And very few women. And they were dormant in the day and humming at night, where you could work with, or be outdoors without being attacked from the air. This is in the north. And I spent 2 weeks there, traveling from, I think the airport was probably 50 or 60 miles away. Because you couldn't have an airport in North Korea. They were all destroyed. These were landing fields that they prepare for. And then they'd have to move them someplace else within weeks or months. And they'd be bussed over. And buses moving in the daylight. They had a land siren system that would warn of approaching airplanes. And we had to stop twice going from the landing field to the river we had to cross to get over to Hanoi because of the sirens. which wanted to plane. They'd spotted either us or somebody else moving around up in the north. Planes were coming in and strafing, or they were just coming in looking for something to shoot. We'd fall into a ditch and wait till there was an all clear. And then I saw the destruction of the cities and went down to villages that weren't that affected. But there would be boy children there. All the children were sent out from the city. And of course, there were a lot in the country anyway because it was still a predominantly rural society. But the intensity of the communities that children in school, they'd be standing up in their chairs shouting to the teachers, me, I'll answer the question. And they would be out from dawn to dusk in the rice paddies, treating each little blade of rice like it was a newborn baby or something, because it had to feed the country and the army down south. And they'd even very young children, like 7, 8 years old, be out helping with the rice, trying to feed the nation during a war that would cut them off from importations, really. It was quite an educational experience.
Yeah, it sounds very sounds like
sad in many ways. I remember one night I was way down south and we were sitting around. There's an old man there. I think he was probably completely senile, but everybody revered him. And we were talking, and a little girl came up, about 9 years old, and in fact I asked her, and she said she's 9. And the usual kind of preliminary conversation, I asked her what she wanted to be when she grew up. And she said a soldier. And after that, I met with the president of Korea in Hanoi a few days later, a week maybe. And I told him that story. He got quiet for a while because it troubled him. And he said, that's what we don't know. He said, when I was young, there was peace. I went to college in Paris. I knew the world. She was born in war. She's lived all her years in war. She hasn't known the male members of her family after they reached 14 because they were all down fighting. And what would their values be? What would their character be? What the limitations on what they know from personal experience? Because the schools were electrifying. I mean, they were just, it's like they're all in very intense courses and doubling up on the number of classes they were taking, that sort of stuff, because it was all they knew from the teachers. On all the schools, they said, and of course in Vietnamese, teach well, learn well. And all the kids would stand up in the class and shout, me, when the teacher was going to choose who could answer the question. Whereas when I went to school, it took you under, it looked like you were looking for a pencil you dropped on the floor or something, anyway, not to be asked to answer the question because you didn't know it. Yeah. And the president's response was, that's what we don't know, because our children are born into this, and that's all they've known, and we had perspective. We'd seen peace. We'd seen the possibilities of a rich and good life, of higher education and travel to the rest of the world. It was a good question. And I think it was the main question in his mind, really, except perhaps how do they keep from being destroyed during the war. But you see them now. I was there twice last year, and the place is thriving, north and south, and plenty of food and happy people. You don't find what you feared the war might create, hatred. You don't find hostility toward Europeans or Americans. They might think these are people who are trying to kill us during the war.
And so,
we owe Vietnam a lot for the horror that we wreaked on its people, and for the lessons that they've taught us, if we'll look, about the strength and goodness of people. They hold no grudge against the United States, as far as I can tell. That's a generalization. There's some that must, because they lost limbs or loved ones or both during the war, but certainly there's no teaching of hatred or getting even or anything like that. The country's booming and looking forward, not backward.
well, it must have been a very moving and very moving experience. So, and I wonder how it influenced you, because some 20 years later, you wrote The Fire This Time, U.S. War Crimes in the Gulf, about the Persian Gulf War. In the wake of the 2003 Iraq War and the resumption of airstrikes on Iraq, do you think it would be wise for Americans to review this particular book and the events it cataloged?
I didn't get the question. I heard the information that you stated, but what's the question?
Oh, okay. Do you think it would be wise for Americans to review your book, The Fire This Time, U.S. War Crimes in the Gulf, and the events it cataloged?
I haven't looked at it lately, but I think the lessons it identifies from the horrors of that particularly miserable war, not that there ever was an unmiserable one, or lessons we need to remember and avoid repeating the mistakes of the past.
And what's it called? The Fire This Time documents not only bombing and shelling of civilian buildings and infrastructure far from the battlefield, but also military tactics used against Iraqi military forces that you argue were not only illegal, but also immoral. I imagine that given the role and circumstances that Iraqi soldiers found themselves in, most readers would be disinclined to be sympathetic to them. Could you respond and make the case to such people?
Who's unsympathetic to what now?
What's it called? Readers who will read your book, and what's it called when reading about military tactics used against Iraqi soldiers who invaded Kuwait, and why you think that they should be concerned about those tactics, even though if the Iraqi soldiers might have been in the wrong.
Well, I think it depends on the individual. I think many people in foreign policy and military service can see the desirability of peace. You know, one of our generals says, "It's a good thing that war is so horrible, we've come to love it too well." But obviously, some of our military, everybody's military, I guess, comes to love it too well. The chance for glory, personal glory, at the cost of the destruction of a city or the lives of a whole bunch of people. But it's way past time from a moral standpoint that we learn the unacceptability of war and use our senses and sensibilities to prevent it. And now war has a capacity for omnicide, so it's a threat to life on the planet, and yet the scientists are still trying to find better ways for killing mass numbers of people without destroying all life, just their lives.
And when we're talking about some questionable figures, I'd like to ask you about some individuals you have legally represented throughout your lifetime. You have provided legal counsel to Saddam Hussein, Yugoslav President Slobodan Milosevic, Liberia's Charles Taylor, and Nazi war criminals Karl Linus and Jacob Reimer. Would you say that defending these individuals was imperative to you, and why?
Well, at the most basic level, I think that justice requires the full and fair and effective representation of everyone accused of crime. And if there's an element of people accused of crime that run a greater risk of prejudice, an inability to find facts in their cases, it's there that the greatest effort to assure fairness by not only the effective assistance of counsel, but fair-minded judges and the full ability to present all the evidence supporting the defense is available to all. And that means where you're in an area where hatred has been raised to highly emotional levels, the greatest effort to present all the facts that are relevant to explain and show what happened and why be made. Otherwise, just prejudice sweeps through like the war itself and destroys the enemy rather than applies justice to everyone based upon the best effort possible to find the facts that are at issue.
Huh. And well, I see where you're getting at, and I see how it ties to a statement you made in an interview with a squire where you were quoted as saying, "At some point along the way, I stopped believing in punishment." And to me, that's an incredible statement, because it seems that Americans, whether they be conservative or liberal, religious or non-religious, they're fixated on punishment. How did you come to hold this sentiment, and what do you think are the prospects for Americans?
I didn't hear the statement that you quoted.
And according to Esquire, you were quoted as saying, "At some point along the way, I stopped believing in punishment."
Well, that's yeah.
Is that a misquote?
I stopped that pretty early in some cases. I think I was in about the 5th grade.
Oh, I see.
And I remember hearing about it seemed to me like it had to do with Czechoslovakia for some reason. It might have been in the late 30s, 1930s. And they're going to execute some people. Mm. This is in a classroom. I think it had something called My Weekly Reader that they used to have in school. Mm-hmm. It's a 6-8 page pamphlet that had simplistic presentation of news, both international and domestic. And I just couldn't believe that you're going to arbitrarily kill these people, arbitrary in the sense that you don't have to kill them, but you come to hate them so much, or you're so angry at what they did, or you believe that what they did is so evil that the solution is to kill them. And I couldn't find in my understanding the basis for killing someone, except for where that person is threatening life. there's an immediate threat to life that can be prevented only by stopping the person that would take the lives. Society should never be authorized or excused for taking any life that wasn't clearly essential to prevent the death of others.
That's interesting that account you recalled, because it's called. I guess I had a similar experience when I was 10 years old in the wake of the invasion of Afghanistan. There was a picture in an almanac of like a Taliban soldier who had been captured by Northern Alliance forces, and this was like years before I became like interested in politics. I'm like I said, I'm just 10 years old, and like I was just like the Taliban soldier was like wounded and like totally disarmed. It was like he didn't pose a threat to anybody. And the next picture, it showed him like dragged away and like shot dead, by these soldiers, and he didn't pose any threat. He had been disarmed, and it was just like, and like I just felt it was like wrong, like even though I don't know, I'm not defending any crimes he may have committed, but I just knew it was wrong. And so I don't know, it's just really interesting that you had a similar experience like that when you were young too.
Yeah, very similar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Very similar. In spite of all the cowboy movies and everything, where the tendency was to shoot first and ask questions later, but they always characterize people as good or evil, and life's not like that. His justification in literature and in comic books or the serious books is his distinction, where life is cheap. You can't feel the pain; it's just on paper.
Mm-hmm.
But in real life, you don't take life unless it's absolutely essential to prevent the immediate threat to life of others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a very noble sentiment, if you ask me, and I'm very sympathetic to it. I might even hold it too. And unfortunately, I think we're almost out of time, and so I want to close with this one question: what do you think is the most pressing issue today?
Well, I think it's still violence. There's a much broader range of violence. It's the old violence of war, murder, and we're still spending billions on technology for mass destruction or selective destruction of defenseless people. But beyond that, it's destruction of the support system that Mother Earth has offered humanity up till this time. It is being slowly eroded and in some cases directly destroyed. You go out in a triangle from Da Nang toward the west in Vietnam, where Agent Orange was predominantly used, and you see nothing lives. There's no vegetation. And we have the capacity to render Mother Earth with all her beauty as lifeless as a moon if we keep up our moonshines with our destruction of all the support systems for life on Earth, which is, again, today with the freedom from violence.
All right, well, Thank you very much, Mr. Clark. It was great having you on. Thank you so much for being on the program.
Well, nice to hear you. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, that was Ramsey Clark. He was Deputy and Attorney General under Lyndon B. Johnson, a peace activist, and author of the books Crime in America and The Fire This Time, U.S. War Crimes in the Gulf.